I'm about to propose something that may sound wild to you now, but give me 10 to 15 minutes and I'll explain to you why the NFL should have a draft lottery just like the NBA and NHL. Firstly, the main point of a draft lottery is to discourage tanking, or losing on purpose for a better draft pick. We've seen some scandals pretty recently of teams doing just that. I mean, a certain Miami team was offering to pay their coach $100,000 for every game that he lost. Obviously, that's against the best interest of the league and the best interest of the fans that a certain team is going into a game trying their best not to win. Now, obviously, the players are still trying to win because the players don't get anything out of tanking, but I don't know about you, if my coach and my franchise is trying to lose, that might make it pretty hard on me to win a game. But there's also another more important reason. In a draft lottery, the worst teams are still given the best chance to get the number one overall pick, but any team that misses the playoffs has a chance to get that number one overall selection. The first 4 picks in the NBA are decided by the draft lottery, while picks 5 through 14 are then the remaining teams that didn't get picked in reverse order of record. In the NBA, the draft lottery has allowed for players to end up in far better situations for them to succeed than without it. The draft lottery has created some of the most memorable teams of all time. The lottery is the reason why Allen Iverson ended up in Philadelphia in 1996 instead of in Vancouver on the Grizzlies. It's also what allowed the Spurs dynasty to be created, with Tim Duncan ending up in San Antonio next to David Robinson instead of, well, in Vancouver. The lottery wasn't really nice to the Grizzlies. It's the reason why LeBron had Kyrie when he went back to Cleveland instead of Brandon Knight or Kemba Walker, while Kyrie ended up on the Timberwolves. And while New Orleans wasted their time with Anthony Davis, at least the draft lottery saved us from having to watch him in a Bobcats uniform. So from strictly a fan perspective, this would be a nice ad because we could see some of the best college players end up on not the absolute worst NFL teams every year. But there's an even more important reason, that's the most important reason for why the NFL needs a draft lottery. And it's not to do with the fans, but rather for the players, and especially the quarterbacks at the top of the draft. Every franchise, even the great ones, are going to have a down year eventually. Maybe even a down stretch. A great current example is the Steelers. They've had a long run of consistent success under Mike Tomlin. They've never had a losing season since he took over as head coach, but they're probably headed for that first season this year. But there is a distinct difference between the Steelers and the teams that end up finding themselves in the top 10 almost every year. Even bad teams with good coaches will still find a way to win a few extra games. The Steelers really didn't have playoff hopes coming into this year, didn't have a quarterback figured out at the beginning of the year, and have a lack of weapons all across their offense, yet are still finding themselves at 5-7. While a team like the Broncos, who, let's be honest, outside of the Manning years, haven't been a well-run franchise since the days of John Elway being under center, are 3-9 despite trading for Russell Wilson. And look, this might be another video, but you can blame Wilson all you want, and he deserves a little bit of the blame for sure. He's been bad. Most of the problems in Denver are the coaching staff right now, so but we'll talk about that maybe another video, because I'm not getting into that. That's the whole thing. But the Browns, after years and years and years of top 10 picks, are at the same record as Pittsburgh. Good coaching matters more than in any other Big Four league. NBA, you can hire almost anybody as long as you have the most talented roster. You're probably going to win the championship or at least be in contention. In the MLB, yeah, you need situational awareness, you need leadership and all of that, but there are no plays in baseball. As long as you have the best pitchers and the best batters, and you take care of them, you're going to be in the playoffs. And the playoffs really boil down to either who's the hottest during the playoffs or who has the best team. And I know I'm boiling that down to an incredibly, stupidly simplified rate, and obviously you can't just be anybody and lead a team. But most of the time in those sports, if you have the most talented players, you're at least going to be in the conversation for a championship. But that's not the case in the NFL. I mean, we've seen, say, a team like the Rams a few years ago have a complete turnaround just off of one smart coaching hire, switching from Jeff Fisher to Sean McVay. The problem is that most coaching hires don't end up as successes. 10 of the 32 NFL teams coming into this year hired new coaches. I'd say only about 3 of them have been successes, with some of them still being up in the air, but the ones that have been tire fires are exactly the teams that you'd expect. Jacksonville, Denver, and Houston. 3 of the worst 6 teams in terms of winning percentage over the last 5 years, meaning teams that have had the highest picks in the draft year over year and should be ending up with the best players out of them. So is it just a coincidence that the players these teams are drafting are just bad and they have bad luck in the draft? Or is it maybe more likely that putting young players with potential into the care of the worst teams and probably the worst coaches in the league is not a recipe for success? I don't know, that's a pretty hard one. How can any of these highly drafted players be expected to have success when you're putting them on the worst franchises every year? It's like expecting the best heart surgeons to be put in the worst hospitals with the worst equipment, having incompetent assistants and nurses around them while also blasting music in their face while they're operating. Look, let me give you an example. Josh Allen is a top 5 quarterback in the league. I don't think anybody would deny that. I'm not arguing that. I think most people would say he's top 2 right now with Patrick Mahomes. But there's a reason he went 7th overall to the Bills behind Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. He went to college at Wyoming, wasn't that dominant there, didn't put up crazy numbers, his accuracy was non-existent. But he did have great physical traits, that's why he ended up going in the top 10 anyways. But people, even at the time, thought the Bills reached for him at 7. I know it's easy to just look at what he's doing right now and say, oh, he would have succeeded anywhere. The Jets should have drafted him. The Browns should have drafted him. But do you honestly think, just honestly ask yourself, does Josh Allen become the player he is today if his head coach was Adam Gase and he had the receiving core that the Jets did? Or do you maybe think that Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll had maybe something just a little bit to do with his development into what he is? I'd go with the latter. Does Patrick Mahomes turn into the player he is today if he's forced to start year 1 for the Bears in Chicago under Matt Nagy? Or do you think maybe he got some advantage from playing behind Alex Smith for a year, being coached by Andy Reid and having Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce? Does Sam Bradford turn to the franchise quarterback that many people thought he would be if he isn't drafted by a team that had a head coach with a career record of 11-41? I don't know. Those are questions we're never going to know the answer to, but questions that I think are all valid if you don't view the league and its players and the draft like it's Madden. They aren't players with an overall or attributes rated out of 99 that are just going to be good anywhere. Schemes matter, coaching matters, and the players around you matter. And look, a draft lottery doesn't guarantee that Trevor Lawrence isn't suffering and irrelevant in Jacksonville right now, but it at least prevents the same teams from constantly getting the top players every year and lessens the reward of tanking year after year after year. And the NFL is falling behind the times now. They're the only Big 4 sports league that doesn't have a draft lottery. The MLB is actually doing their first this month, but people are always going to be skeptical and hesitant until they actually see what it looks like. So let me show you. This is the draft order as it stands after week 13. But if we run a draft lottery similar to the NBA's odds, this is a possible draft order we could end up with. The Seahawks earn the first overall pick and get to draft their quarterback of the future from the Russell Wilson trade. Bryce Young ends up with possibly a year behind Geno Smith, a great running back in Kenneth Walker, an improving O-line, and 2 great wide receivers with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Indy jumps all the way to number 2 and gets to finally plug a young stud in at quarterback instead of these one-year Band-Aid fixes that they've had, and gets to draft CJ Stroud. Houston falls to 3 and probably ends up drafting Will Anderson, and Philly could go in a multitude of directions to improve that great roster. And this is just one of infinite options. Vegas could overnight have a quarterback controversy and a huge decision to make, and Carolina gets their prayers answered and their QB woes solved out of the blue. Or Detroit helps the Rams win a Super Bowl, only to the next year be rewarded with a new franchise quarterback, while Jacksonville gets Anderson to pair alongside Josh Allen for one of the most fearsome edge rush duos in the league, while Green Bay gets to decide whether they want to replace Rodgers with CJ Stroud or Jordan Love. It just adds so much suspense and intrigue for every single team that misses the playoffs. Because while there may be a slight argument for who the number 1 overall pick is going to be this year in 2023 between Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or maybe the outside chance of Will Anderson, I don't think there's any question in anyone's mind who the number 1 player is going to be next year in 2024. And I pray that he does not get wasted away on the Raiders or the Colts or the Browns. If there were an NFL draft lottery, I will be watching and I'll be crossing my fingers, hoping that at least a well-run franchise gets lucky and has the chance to draft the best quarterback in all of college football